Hi, I'm Joanne Kamens. I work at AdGene. I'm the executive director, and AdGene is one of the sponsors of today's presentation called Not Networking 101. I call it not networking because the word networking implies going to a meeting, exchanging cards, and not really getting to know the people that you meet. So this talk is really about what to do when you meet people, how to build those relationships so that they help you later in your career. I want to thank iBio and ASCB for inviting me to give this talk today. And I hope you enjoy the content. I can be reached at the Twitter handles on this first slide that you can see, so feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or comments. So first I want to talk about AdGene. AdGene is a repository. The reason why I get to talk about them for a few minutes is because they're sponsoring my time in being here today and creating this presentation. And AdGene is a nonprofit, mission-driven company that facilitates collaboration in the scientific community. And people know, most people in science that are molecular biologists know, that AdGene does this by making it easy for them to share plasmids. So if you make plasmids in your lab and haven't deposited them with AdGene, especially published plasmids or research tools that are good for the community, contact us because it might be easier for us to help you get the word out. There's a lot of reasons to deposit to AdGene. Right now we have over 25,000 plasmids in the library, so if you are about to clone something, it's probably better if you would check our library first, because why make the same thing twice? We also have over 1,500 contributing labs from over almost 300 institutions. We're shipping more like 2,000 plasmids a week right now, and half of those go to scientists outside the United States. We ship to over 70 countries. Okay, so now into the talk on building relationships for success. So what is networking? So I mentioned before that people tend to think that networking is giving their card, getting their card. And while that's a good way to meet people, it's really more than that. It's a way to share ideas, get information, advice, and input. It's not just at work. It can be anywhere that you're meeting people. I've had many, many examples where I've met people at sports games, at temple, and some other social situation where it's turned out to be a part of my professional life or a part of my personal interests. But really the key is not just to meeting people, but developing relationships with them. Because you don't just meet someone and then they do a favor for you. The people that do favors for you or that you do favors for are the people that you know and have an ongoing relationship with. So what that means is if you're in graduate school or you're doing a postdoc, it's never too early to start building those relationships. This means the people in the lab next door, the grad students in your lab, different people in your department. Those people in 10 years will be colleagues of yours in other cities, in industry, in academia, and they will give you access to opportunities and resources and information. So it really is something that has to be a focus. You can't just put your nose to the bench. You have to be building these relationships early because when you need a job or you need a favor, it's too late to look for those relationships. So why is building diverse relationships important? Well, even if you're shy, it's good to have a more satisfying professional life. Every aspect of science involves collaboration now. I don't know a scientist who doesn't come upon something in their work that they need to get advice or input about. And instead of reading 100 papers, wouldn't it be great if you could just pick up the phone and say, hey, I know you're an expert in Y. I need to know about Y, and I need to know about it right now because I got this weird result in my data. It's so much more helpful, it's time-saving, and it's much more of an enjoyable experience to work with people on those kinds of opportunities. There's no doubt that it helps people get jobs, and I'll tell you some stories from my own career about that. It can provide a support system. Sometimes you just need a cheerleader, and having the right connections and associates can say, you can do it. Seems like a big, like a small thing, but it can really be a big thing in your career in developing confidence and in developing your identity, your brand. What is it that you're known for? Your network and your connections all help you build that experience. So this is true. This is how people get jobs. So I'm lucky. I'm in Boston. It's a very strong network. There's a lot of networking resources available. There's a lot of places you can go and things you can do. But the fact of the matter is, no matter where you live, no matter what you do, when you know people, it's easier to get a job. So when I applied for my job at AdGene, which I love so much, it's a great place to work. I feel like it's a real opportunity for me. When the person whose job I was, the person who was the primary interviewer of the job was one of the founders of AdGene, Melina Fan. And Melina was someone who I had handed an award to at a ceremony about a couple of years before. So instead of being a stranger, it was someone known to me. And when I went in to interview with the board of AdGene, half of the people on the board knew me or I knew for many, many years. So there's no doubt that getting jobs is helped by having these type of connections. And not just people, again, that you've exchanged cards with and you've met once, but people that you've really spent time with and done things for. And we'll talk more about that. So I see so many scientists, postdocs, grad students interested in breaking into industry. And if that's your goal, if you don't know anybody in industry, if you have no relationships with people in industry, you're making it much harder for yourself to do that. There's no doubt that this is a good reason to build relationships in your career. But academic scientists need a network as well. I'm always shocked by the fact that people think that the granting and publication experience, collaboration, space in your department, everything that you do as a scientist can be helped by people who care about you, who have relationships with you, or are willing to do you a favor. Even just introducing you to the next person that you should talk to for collaboration. All those relationships help you. It's much stronger than looking up things online. There's no doubt that looking up things online is important, but knowing people and having people that know about you and introducing you to useful connections is really, really important. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never been in a department where knowing the administrative assistant has not been my most important connection. Those are the people in your department that can get things done. And if you haven't developed a relationship with them, you're wasting your time in getting things done in a much slower way. Professional societies is a great way to get to know people. And wow, if you have connections on granting agencies and review committees, this is an enormous boost to your career in academia. So there's no doubt that these skills are valuable not just for an industry transition, but also for scientists who are going to stay in an academic setting. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the practical things to do to build your network and develop those relationships. And I'm going to try and give you some very concrete tools for that, because I find some people who don't have practice doing it find very hard at where to start. So you should know that practice makes it easier. So that's the first thing. So if you ask yourself, every time I go into a situation where I can meet people, I'm going to try and meet just one person. You don't want to wait until you need your network to build it, because if you wait till then, you don't have a relationship. Tons and tons of people link in with me from 10 years ago when I knew them, but they haven't bothered to answer my emails or stay in touch or acknowledge my job changes. We're not in touch. I'm much less likely to activate my network or to do something as a favor for them than I am for someone who I've been in touch with steadily over the last 10 to 20 years of my career. So you can't wait to activate it. You don't know where key connections will come when. I meet people everywhere I go. I meet people when I go speak. I meet people around the country. I meet people in coffee shops. I meet people on airplanes. You never know where connections will come from. And anytime you're meeting with people, you're networking. So we tend to hate networking. And you are in an airplane and you want to put your headphones on and you don't really want to meet the person next to you, even though you see that they're reading Nature. It might be worth 5 minutes of your time to introduce yourself to the person next to you and say, oh, hey, I liked that article in Nature, that was X, and take that extra, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. But artificial networking is hard. So I'm going to talk about some of the natural ways you can network. Artificial networking is going to an event, you stand in a corner, you try and get someone to talk to you. Most people are not comfortable doing that, believe it or not, although there are ways to work networking events and conferences. Of course, conferences are a huge opportunity to do networking. But what we want to do is make networking feel normal. So the way it always worked for me was not something that I did consciously, but becoming active in groups. I founded a Boston chapter for the Association for Women in Science. I got involved in the board of the Healthcare Business Women's Association. I'm actually on the board of the MIT Hillel Association now, and I meet kinds of interesting people that way. Showing people what you can do, what work you can do by volunteering or by becoming active in a professional group is a great way to network, because whether you like it or not, those people become your connections and your relationships. So when I came to AdGene, one of the things that they wanted was a reference for someone in nonprofit work, because I had been in for-profit companies, although I had done a lot of nonprofit work in my career, never for money. And it was amazing to me the number of people who I had volunteered with, not people who I was paid to work with, who were paid to work with me, who were willing to step forward and talk about my work as a reference when that became necessary for my job transition. So you never know. Those relationships can be deep. They can lead to opportunities. And it's a very, very natural way of meeting people and getting to know them. I have had a rule for the last 20 years. I have lunch with another human being at least twice a week. sometimes in my department, sometimes not in my department, at my company, not at my company. Now that I'm at Agene, I probably do it 5 or 6 times a week, so it's really fun because I've had a lot of practice, so it's comfortable for me. But it's really, really important to talk to other people. I have to tell you, when I had 2 children, 3 and 5, I worked full-time at a pharmaceutical company, and I had an hour commute. It wasn't easy for me not to want to have my lunch at my desk and, while I was on the internet and do nothing else and not talk to anybody because I was tired and the quiet was very, very pleasant. But twice a week on my calendar, I make dates with people. And it's very natural to call someone and say, hey, I want to learn more about what you do in your department with your work. Come have lunch with me. So it's a natural way to network and a good way to get to know people. I'm going to tell one other story about this, about I hate networking. So I gave this talk recently at a Boston university, and a university in Boston, not Boston University. And I come in the room, and there's 100 people in the room getting cookies and coffee, and that was great. Big auditorium, though. So I had blocked off the last few rows, because when I give this talk, when there are people around, I usually have interactive activities that we do as part of the workshop. And every single person sat down with an empty seat beside them and the next person. Now, these are people that are all at the same university, many of them working together in the same departments, mostly postdocs. Basically, I have this little image on the slide of an empty seat. It basically says, when you leave a seat between you and the next person, it's like saying, I'm not interested in you, and I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want to meet you. You may as well put a t-shirt on that just says, not interested, okay? And so the room was completely silent. Everyone's eating their cookies. There's like 100 people in the room. I couldn't believe it. So I made them all get up and sit next to another person. Within 3 minutes, the room was full of noise. People were talking, shaking hands, introducing themselves, and talking about their work. I almost didn't even need to start the workshop because we had accomplished the goal, okay? So the very most natural thing to do at a conference or when you attend a talk, especially in your department, these are really your colleagues and friends. There's no reason for you not to get to know them, is sit next to someone and just introduce yourself and ask them what they do. It's completely natural. It's not weird. It's one-on-one. You're not in a scary crowd. You're just talking to one person. So if you say to yourself, once a month, I am going to sit next to a stranger and introduce myself, you will get better at it as time goes on. So setting goals like that for yourself is a very good way to grow your network with actual action as opposed to just thinking about it. Okay, so there are events. And networking events are good because everybody there is there to meet people. So especially if you're interested in getting into industry, or if you're at a conference, so I would say a conference is a networking event. At a conference, scientists want to meet each other to see what opportunities there are for collaboration and information sharing. And at a networking event, academia and industry science want to meet other people and see what opportunities potentially for jobs or funding or whatever else may come out of it. So it's there for that. So you shouldn't feel weird about talking to people or joining a crowd of people who are talking, or talk to someone who's standing by themselves in a corner. They're really going to appreciate the fact that you have, saved them from being alone in the corner, okay? So those are really easy ways. Networking, if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, especially if you hate those types of events, you can get a lot of benefit because everyone's there for the same reason. One good thing to do is come prepared. Figure out who's going to be at the event. Who will be there? Who is there going to be to talk to? What information do you have on the topic? Perhaps you're a little bit prepared so you have something to talk about. But one thing I want to say, you don't have to talk to people you don't like. So that's the good thing about a networking event. And in general, I don't suggest that you network with people that are unpleasant, you don't like, or you're having a hard time connecting with because you have nothing in common. Really, networking is not talking to a crowd, it's talking one-on-one with a person. If you go to an event and you meet 2 people that you want to follow up with, maybe have coffee with them or send them an article or something. We'll talk more about that in some upcoming slides. If you want to do that, that's all you have to do to have accomplished your goal for the evening. And if you're talking to someone that you've talked to for a few minutes, you don't see much there, maybe you have exchanged cards, we'll talk about that in a second, you just say, I'm going to go get a drink. It's nice to meet you, shake hands, and move on. That's completely natural at a networking event. Again, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. So it does take a little energy and initiative to work a networking event, but you can get a lot out of it if you make your focus to be, I'm going to meet 1 or 2 people that I want to talk to again. So let's talk about being at an event or meeting someone for the first time. So you should have something ready a little bit in your head, and don't think that good networkers do this naturally, they do it without trying. Oh no, they prepare. they talk about what they want to say. When I go to an event and I want to get the word out about Addgene, I can tell you in 60 seconds what the reason is why you would want to get involved in working with Addgene or depositing to our library. Work on it. Practice it with friends. Practice it with relatives. Write it out, but then don't give it as a speech, but make sure you get the points down that you want to say. Don't get bogged down with jargon. Don't walk up to somebody and say, I work on phosphate 521 of the MAP kinase gene, because they're not really interested probably in phosphate 521. Now, if you speak to them for 5 minutes and find out that they work on dephosphorylation of phosphate 521, boy, you guys probably have a lot to talk about, okay? But probably they're interested in signal transduction in general, potentially, or maybe they're interested in cancer, which is what you really work on when you're working on MAP kinase genes or some other disease state. So think about the general application of what you do, not about your specific detail or scientific jargon. And you may have different versions of this speech. If you go to a conference on MAP kinases, well, you can probably let loose on phosphate, on tyrosine 521. But if you don't have, if you're not at a scientific conference, what you talk to people about might look very different. So another thing is you may want to have a hook or a story. So people don't give you things if you don't tell them what you want. So if you're having trouble with a scientific problem, that's a good thing to have ready in your back pocket to talk about at a conference. So for example, the most popular, most responded to presentation I ever gave was about 12 years ago at a very early conference on RNAi. And for those of you that work in that field, you know that's a very young field. And early on, there were no purchasable reagents. We were making things ourselves. We couldn't buy things off the shelves. And I was having a lot of technical difficulties. It turned out one of the technical difficulties that we were labeling oligos to do RNAi with a fluor, with a glowing chemical moiety that was quenched in the compartment where RNAi took place. So we couldn't tell if we were delivering the molecules to the cells, because as soon as things started working, they would get quenched, and we didn't really know this. All we knew was that the color disappeared. We didn't really understand what was going on. So I gave a talk about all my failed experiments, a half an hour, showing data, showing examples of things that weren't working. I was doing RNAi in immune cells. It was fairly difficult technically. And I talked about my problems. I got so many calls and articles and suggestions. And in fact, one of the collaborations that I developed as a result of that conference resulted in my second job, which was at biotech in an RNAi company many, many years later, probably 8 years after the fact or 9 years after this. So really, be ready with something that you want to ask for and ask help for. Have something interesting to talk about. If someone says, how are you? Don't just say, I'm fine. Say, well, I'm really happy because my kid learned to drive today and got their license. And you may have a story that you can share. So be a little personal. That makes it much easier to have a conversation when you're in an artificial networking situation. So let's talk about teaching your name. So the first thing I want to tell you is you have to still have a business card. It'll be great when we can all beam each other our information on our phones, but that's not really the case. But there is a kind of secret reason to have a business card, even if it just says your name and where you're a postdoc and that you're a postdoc. Also, most of your universities or your organizations will allow you to put their logo on those cards. They're free. You can go to Vistaprint and get 500 cards. But the real reason for having a business card is because what happens when you give someone your card? They give you theirs. If you don't have a card to give and you want to get the person's contact information of the person that you're talking to, you can't do it if you don't have a card of your own. So if you're doing any kind of industry networking, maybe not as true in academia, but if you are interested in sort of formal networking, make sure that you have a business card to give so that the reason is so that you can get them. So when you're at a networking event, the other thing is to make sure that your name tag is very visible. I mean, you want people to learn your name. This is not a thing that you should hide. I can't tell you the number of times I go to an event and people have pasted put their tag down at their butt or down on their leg. It's completely ridiculous. The person to see your name has to bend down and look ridiculous. You want to put your name tag somehow with a pin, with a clip on your right lapel, easily to see it. Make sure your hair's not in the way, there's no scarves. Make sure your name tag is visible. And if someone else's name tag isn't visible, I'm very visual. They tell me their name, I won't learn it. But if I see it, I'll remember. I will tell someone, I can't see your name tag, can I take a better look? This is a polite thing to do. You're telling someone that you care about learning their name, okay? It's a great way to start a conversation. Also, still in this country and in most countries, it's very important to have a firm and practiced handshake. If you don't do this well, find someone who does it well and get them to teach you how to do it and practice until it's natural. There's nothing like going up to someone, shaking hands, and they give you a little limp handshake. It gives somebody an impression of you as being weak and unimportant. It's a psychological thing. They don't do it on purpose. They just get the impression that there's not much to you. So if you don't know what that means, find someone to teach you how to have a firm and practiced handshake. The other thing is if you're teaching your name, make sure you say your name clearly. If you have a name that's difficult, potentially if you're in an English-speaking environment, which is usually true in science, make sure that your name is very clear. And if you have a name with 5 syllables that's hard for most Americans or English speakers to pronounce, maybe you want to share a nickname or make a joke about the pronunciation because it's a good way for people to learn it. I met someone whose name was Neve, and none of the letters in her name spelled that word. It was an Irish name that was spelled completely differently than it sounded. Nobody ever forgot her name because she had it on her name tag and you had to go through a whole conversation about why that was pronounced Neve. It was a huge advantage for her. No one ever forgot her name, okay? So you can use your name as a way of breaking the ice. If someone tells you their name and you didn't hear it, again, it's polite to ask them to repeat it, right? All you're doing is saying, I care about you. I want to learn your name, okay? And that can also get the conversation going. So I mentioned before how important it is to tell people what you need. People like to help people, and those are the people that you want to be networking with and building relationships with anyway. You want to be open with your challenges, but not whiny. So it is tough. I meet tons of people who are looking for work right now, and some of them have been looking for work for a long, long time, right? It's hard not to get whiny. But that's not really going to help because it's scary to the people that you're meeting unless it's a very, very close relationship. So be careful about that. You don't want to get over-dependent. If someone helps you, don't call them every week, especially if it's not someone that you know well. If they give you a little bit of help, thank them and move on. But it doesn't mean that you can't reach out. It just be careful about becoming over-dependent. But most people do want to help. So I'll tell you a little story about why Benjamin Franklin is on this slide. It's really interesting to me. And again, asking for help is another thing that gets easier the more you do it, okay? So Benjamin Franklin discovered when he was in the Continental Congress that there were some guys he didn't get along with so well. So for someone that he really, really didn't like him, he would go to them and ask them to borrow a book. Now, borrowing a book those days was a much bigger deal. It's sort of like borrowing someone an iPad now because there weren't that many and they were quite expensive. He would borrow the book because it was very hard to say no to a polite request like that. He would read it. He would give it back to the person, tell them how smart they were for buying such a valuable and interesting book. He would chat with them about it, and he would thank them profusely for the favor that they had done for him, okay? Now, the weird thing he noticed about this was that when people did this favor for him, they liked him better. So when people help you, it turns out that is a very good way of building relationships. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't help them. Of course, people like it when you help them and can do favors for them. But sometimes, really just getting someone to help you is the way to build the relationship. And I have done this many, many times. I was actually, when I was between jobs before I started working at Adgene, was really the first time I ever really had to look for a job and really activate my network. First thing I did, I went up on LinkedIn and I put my status as looking for work. I was laid off. It was an open thing. I wasn't looking for a job behind the scenes. The number of offers that came in to help me, it was a huge number. But of course, the people that I really needed to talk to were not always the ones that got in touch with me. So I was using my network to get to the companies I was interested in and to try and get information. And I got set up to have coffee with this one guy. And he shows up kind of late and he looks very frazzled and he's clearly very, very clear within the first few minutes he is not interested in talking to me. He's doing this as a favor to some friend. He doesn't think I'm a match for this job that they have. He doesn't really want to waste his time. He's incredibly busy. So I'm like, oh, how am I going to, this is really going to be awkward. I just got to let this guy go. We talk for a few minutes. He looks very tired. It becomes clear that this particular job isn't good. There's not really an opportunity. He doesn't really seem like he really wants to kind of go out of his way to help me to see if there might be a fit in the future. It's not very productive. Finally, I just looked at him and I said, "You look really tired." And he said, "I am exhausted. My kids will not sleep. We are so tired. We don't do anything fun anymore. We're so exhausted. All we do is work and not sleep. And we can't get our kids to sleep. We wanted to go to the museum this weekend, and we're just too tired, and the kids are too complaining about it. And, we used to love to go to the museum, and we don't do it anymore." And I said, "Wow, I know what you mean. My kids are much older than yours, but I've been there. I had two kids 2 years apart." I said, "But have you played museum scavenger hunt?" He goes, "What's museum scavenger hunt?" And I said, "Well, me and my husband really love museums. And it's very hard to take small children to an art museum. But what we do with our kids is we make them a list of things to find in the museum: cows, guys with pointy beards, women with one eye. If you know what the collection is like a little bit, it's pretty easy to do this scavenger hunt thing. And they get a quarter every time they find one of the things on their list. And then they go to the gift shop at the end and they get to spend it. Doesn't buy you the whole day, but you get about 3 hours if your list is good. And he said, this is awesome. I'm so excited about this. I can't wait to go and try this. And sure enough, that guy emailed me a week later and said, we played museum scavenger hunt. Me and my wife had the really great time at the museum, and the kids had a great time, and it was just a fun afternoon. Thank you so much, right? So instead of that really awful situation like coffee that you want to get out of, I turned it into, a way to help. And for sure, that guy's going to be much more willing to help me if I contact him again next time. So think about how you can help people in ways and how they can help you. Really, people enjoy that exchange. So how can I help? That's how I see networking. The minute I meet someone, I don't think what they can do for me. I think what I can do for them. And it may feel to you like you don't have much to offer yet, but I hope the story that I just told you tells you everybody has something to offer. You may have information, you may have a skill, you may be the only one in the world that is as good at you are as injecting into that type of cell. Whatever it is, focus on the ways in which you can help. And I don't keep score. I don't say like, I helped you, so you help me. Really, what goes around comes around. I do what I can for people. I help them. I connect them when I can. And I give them the time that I can. And I do say no as well. Everybody has to say no sometimes. But it's really important to just be in a mode where you do things for people and help them. It's really the greatest way to build relationships. So, okay, you've met someone. Maybe you've got their card. Maybe they did you a favor. Maybe they connected you to someone or gave you some advice or gave you a paper that was important. You can say thank you. You can send an email. These days, we didn't have email when I started networking. We had to actually call people and talk to them all the time. That continues to be an important thing, but email's great for that, staying in touch with people, social media. You can follow up with them, something else you thought of. Make a note that this person's interested in a certain topic, and when you see a paper on that topic, you can send it to them. Maybe you want to share preprints or protocols with them. They may be able to give you very good advice about your next steps in your experiments and enjoy helping you, as I said before. Another great thing is if people work in companies, or if they're in a lab, you can follow their PubMed publication records, or you can follow a newsletter like the Fierce series. There's Fierce Pharma, there's Fierce Biotech. It's a daily newsletter. And when you see something happen at their company, and also actually LinkedIn does a very good job of this as well, you can email them when something good happens. So when I see that someone's company just landed $15 million in venture funding, I send them a note. They're celebrating. Sometimes I get invited to the celebrations, which is fun as well. It's another way of meeting people and developing a relationship, because whenever you're celebrating with someone, that's why you go to weddings, bar mitzvahs, baby parties. It's because celebration is a way for people to bond. So email your connections when good things happen. It's a natural way of following up. You also can stay in touch on LinkedIn. Follow the people that you're LinkedIn with. Comment when they comment. Don't stalk them. That gets a little creepy. If something good happens in their life or they place a comment, that you think is good on LinkedIn, you can comment on that. It is relationship building. You have to still see people in person. Don't get me wrong. You have to do those coffees and those, actual in-person conference meetings. But this is a way of staying in touch. A good way to get to know people is to go to the same organization's events over and over again. So, for example, I'm in the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association. I've been going to their events for many, many years. I know a lot of the people there already, and of course, I volunteered in that organization. So when I go, it's not uncomfortable because I'm there reconnecting with all kinds of friends and people that I've seen for many years. So that's a very good way. So instead of organization hopping, pick one that you want to get involved in that jives with you and that speaks to you. A great way to stay in touch with academic connections or industry as well is to invite them to speak at a conference or in your department. So you have a lot of power when you organize a panel. If you can get yourself into a position where you're organizing a panel at a conference or your department has a seminar series, you get to meet all the interesting people that come through. Maybe you get to take them to lunch. That seems like time consuming, but that is time well spent. So those may be volunteer positions that you want to look for and seek out. So where else can you practice? If you don't know the majority of postdocs in your department, make that your first goal. Start meeting them when you go to talks. Sit down next to someone you don't know. You yourself should be a speaker at a conference or whenever you can arrange it. Do an informal speaker series for postdocs to practice in your department. You're going to get to meet everybody that way. Be in your postdoc association board. Join the National Postdoc Association board. There are professional organizations, depending on what city you're in. There are all kinds of networking opportunities. Go online. You have no excuse because these things are easy to find online these days. And the more you look for those opportunities, the more you'll find them. There's also often postdoc volunteer positions at the professional societies, whether it's the AI or the ASCB or whatever leadership roles you want. There's often opportunities to volunteer there, and it's a great way to meet people early in your career that will stay your colleagues later on in your area of science. So let's talk about social media for 1 second before I wrap up. So there is nothing that takes the place of getting to know people in person. I don't care what anybody says. I may be a little bit older. I'm very, very social media savvy. I tweet. I have a very active LinkedIn account. I actually tweet for 2 accounts. I tweet as myself and I tweet as Adjean. So I know how to do all that stuff, but there is nothing in the world that replaces meeting people. However, you really should know that having a social media presence can be a big advantage to developing relationships and certainly to a career search, particularly in industry. So I shouldn't have to say any more about this. Don't put dumb stuff on Facebook. Enough said. The world is stalking you. The world is looking at your life online. You can lose you don't get a job with Facebook, but you can easily lose a job because of Facebook. So please be careful. You have to have a LinkedIn account if you're interested in moving to industry and for many academic types of positions. In Europe, people are using something called Viadeo, so you may have to have both depending on where you live or where your focus is. I've talked to people, I meet with them, they tell me they're looking for jobs in industry, and when I say, well, how does your LinkedIn profile look? And I may know already because I've checked it out and I know it looks bad. And they say, oh, I hate LinkedIn. Well, I'm here to tell you, you have no choice. If you're interested in having a job in industry, people are going to look at that, and it should look as good or better than your resume. So feel free to look me up to see what I mean by that. But it's very, very important that if you're job hunting, that you've taken a professional turn to using LinkedIn. Put up a professional, clear picture. This is not Facebook. It's not for you, sitting with your dog in the yard. Get a picture of yourself taken that makes you look like a professional. You can be in the lab. You don't have to have a headshot, but have it be a professional picture. Invite people that you've really met that you want to stay in touch with to connect with you on LinkedIn, but don't invite people that you haven't met. That's just stalking. It's creepy. You can have someone else connect you. Don't ever send someone a LinkedIn invite text that's generic. I've discovered that LinkedIn recently will send out invitations for you that just say something very generic. People, myself included, I never answer those. People have to tell me why they're connecting with me and how they know me. It's just another way of increasing the relationship as opposed to an anonymous tap. Most people reject those anonymous taps, so really try and avoid that. There's a ton of information on the internet about the proper use of LinkedIn and suggestions and ideas and in social media. So it's a good way to brand yourself. Many scientists now are creating blogs and other ways of sharing their information, creating their personal brand. You can Google me. I have a very obvious brand online. And so think about that as an opportunity, but not a have to. But having a professional profile on LinkedIn, that's probably a have to. Finally, I just want to remind you of a few tips. We all have something to offer. So the more that you can offer in a networking situation, that will grow. So that may not mean that the Nobel Prize winning speaker, you may not have something to offer her, but a fellow postdoc in your lab, you may have something to offer. It's something that builds over time. So start with the simpler networking interactions, the ones with peers, and it'll allow you to work up to making other types of connections. I know that you're busy. I've been there. I've done that. You have to make time to stay in touch with people. You should still be in touch with your graduate, lab colleagues, your advisor, anybody you collaborated with. You have to find ways to stay in touch with people because it's just going to be too important later. One secret of networking, again, you don't have to network and stay in touch with people that you don't like. So focus on the people with whom you develop a rapport that you have a lot in common with. They may be culturally similar to you or culturally different, but people that you like talking to. Those are the people that I see over and over and that end up being my most valuable connections. One good networking secret is be memorable. So I'm pretty memorable. I'm 5 feet tall. I have bright red hair. I'm not very quiet. So, and usually when I go to a networking event, I start out by having a story that I'm ready to be a bit open about myself. I have 2 kids, they're 19 and 21. They're a source of endless stories for me. Many people can connect to you if they hear what your kids are up to, what's going on in your life. So I know some people are very shy and this may not be your natural tendency, but come up with one story about yourself that's personal that you want to share. Something that's difficult in the lab, something that's troubling you and your family. We're planning a trip to Greece. Everybody I meet these days, I ask them, what do they know about Greece? Because we're trying to figure out where we want to go. It gets the conversation started. It makes it much easier to get to know people if you have something to say. So be prepared every day with what you're going to talk about today, and it'll be a little easier. And so my final advice to you is try something new. You can always go back to the old way you were doing things, but I think that with some practice, with some of these tools and tricks that I've given you, you'll get a lot of benefit in your scientific relationships and also in your career. Thanks for listening, and you can reach me through social media if you have questions or comments about this presentation. Take care.